Welcome back to the Locked On Hornets podcast, where we now discuss one of the coaching candidates that maybe could be the next head coach of the Charlotte Hornets. That's Kenny Atkinson, the former assistant, maybe former assistant with Golden State, also former assistant.
Wow, you're already firing him. You're already making him move on.
I don't know if I'm firing him so much as promoting him to a head coach of the Charlotte Hornets, but he did used to be the head coach of the Brooklyn Nets a few years back. And to talk more about that, we welcome Adam Armbrecht of the Locked On Nets podcast. You can follow him on Twitter, by the way, at Adam Armbrecht. At Adam Armbrecht. I'm already butchering this. Adam, how are you doing today?
It's all good, man. A German last name is just no way to be in the media. I think it's a mistake. And if I could change it, I would. But I just feel like, it was given to me. So I try to stand by. But I'm good, guys. How are you?
I'm doing well, and we're going to do a better job of pronouncing your last name. Kenny Atkinson, somebody I think is kind of a favorite among a lot of the fan base here. A lot of people like what he did with the Nets when they were able to get to the postseason. Now, there's a lot of decent names out there that the Charlotte Hornets are interested in right now, but Kenny Atkinson, again, one of the guys that I think a lot of people would be happy with. What was your take on his tenure with the Nets when he had his 4-year run with that franchise?
Yeah, it's interesting because, Kenny was brought in by Sean Marks and he's still very well regarded in the organization. And you looked at it as a coach that was going to maximize the value of a young team in a transitional period, right? The hard part is trying to examine what he accomplished there relative to what expectations were. This is a roster that was filled with young talent. This is the beginning of getting Joe Harris off the Cleveland Cavaliers scrap heap, the Spencer Dinwiddie's of the world, DAngelo Russell off of his what felt like could have been career bottoming out in the LA Lakers system. He comes over and reclamates his reputation as well. So there's a lot of positives. But the drawback would be when you look inside the season records, it didn't necessarily get the job done, especially when you're talking about the Charlotte Hornets, a team that I think has expectations of trying to push into that playoff picture with consistency.
Yeah, I mean, you go back to the 42-40 season where the Nets get into the postseason. The Nets, they were down bad, right? Couldn't figure out, they couldn't tank because you couldn't get your own draft picks because they were all going to the Boston Celtics. And because of that, you had to manufacture talent in different ways. And you mentioned some of the moves that they made, and it was really an excellent job. And then Atkinson kind of developed this, this reputation to develop some of that talent on the roster even more so. I don't know if people remember the 28-34 season that took place with the 62 games right afterwards. And so what happened there, Adam, where it looked like was some kind of build, and then he has the losing season in the 62 games he coached with Brooklyn. And then, of course, I think his exit, a lot of people attributed that to Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving not wanting him to be that head coach.
Yeah, ultimately, his departure from the team came down to what the Nets were trying to accomplish. Build yourself up to a point where you're attractive for some of the bigger names in the league. They did that, and now we see how that's still a bit of a work in progress as well. But when it comes to Kenny Atkinson and his tenure, so the positives are, I think what happens as far as from a burnout factor is ultimately he's I don't want to misframe this. He's a rah-rah guy. He's a player's coach, a young player's coach. He maximizes what you get out of young talent. You saw him do this with certain players, even some of the veterans like the DeMarre Carrolls of the world. We saw just before Brook Lopez was moved, spent the last season in Brooklyn developing the outside shot, right? So he's known for creating perimeter shooters out of players that at least have baseline skill sets. He's known for maximizing young talent, Spencer Dinwiddie, Karis LeVert, right? But there is a ceiling to what he's able to do with them. The hard part, when you look at some of these players like DAngelo Russell, he went on to improve his game further. Now with the Timberwolves, Spencer Dinwiddie rose to a level and went and got himself a big payday. We know what Brook Lopez has meant, obviously, to the Milwaukee Bucks in their championship run. So can he be integral in developing and extending the talent of a player? Yes. But can he maximize the usage of them? Can he maximize the X's and O's aspect of that and put them in a winning position? Because regardless of where you looked at the Brooklyn Nets in that final 62-game run for Kenny, I would say that they were underachieving at that point. Now there's things that are happening in the background for the franchise, but you still, I would have preferred to see that this is a coach that's trending towards making the playoffs again. And it wasn't going to make a difference for bringing Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, but I think it made a difference for what Kenny was able to do leaving Brooklyn and having to take a step back, go to the Clippers, then go to Golden State and reconnect with Steve Kerr there and try to resurrect his head coaching profile, which maybe he's done here for Charlotte.
And I think one of the things that excites a lot of Hornets fans is that he has this reputation as the point guard whisperer. He turned Aaron Brooks in Houston into the NBA's most improved player. He worked with Jeremy Lin prior to Lin's sanity. He worked in Atlanta with Jeff Teague and turned Jeff Teague into a really good player for a while there. And I think a lot of people, look at the situation with LaMelo Ball and say, yes, he is on the superstar trajectory, but he's going to, still need some guidance there on what really, makes an NBA point guard take it to that next level. What did you see did you see anything in his tenure with the Nets that lived up to that reputation as point guard whisperer?
Yeah, I mean, listen, again, mention name like Spencer Dinwiddie, right? He falls into the guard role, not pure point guard. But look at DAngelo Russell. I think the best thing that Kenny brings to that specific position is saying you need to play controlled basketball. Those big moments are going to come. And DAngelo Russell had some really big shots over his time with the Brooklyn Nets. But you also need to be setting the tempo for this team, the pace of the offense. You need to be willing to make the right basketball decision and allow those around you to flourish, knowing that your spots are going to come, right? And so I think that he can impact Ball in that way and make him a leader. I mean, listen, again, DAngelo Russell went from being a guy, where was he going to end up, to then being looked at as someone that you could bring into a team like Minnesota and say, you can have success here. You can actually be a veteran leader for this team. And maybe there is that leap that Ball can take where he establishes himself that much further. The push and pull, if we're just being honest here, is this team in the Hornets already beyond what Kenny Atkinson would bring to the table, right? Because now you're talking about, like, we want to make the playoffs and then we want to be successful in the playoffs, right? So,
I think we would take just making the playoffs at this point.
Well, so that's what's interesting, right? So expectation-wise, if that's the expectation, hey, we want to maximize the value of our young players, we want to improve some of our very talented players, and then we want to be in the playoff picture, Kenny can do that for you. The question is going to become, he gets you there next year. Okay, what does year number 2 look like, right? And what does year number 3 look like? Now, that comes down to roster construction and who the Hornets are able to bring in to complement the players that they already have. But I wonder what the ceiling is for Kenny. Maybe that's the biggest thing that I would say in terms of the pause button is, what is his ceiling? Because the next coach you bring in for the Hornets, you probably want this to be the coach that's there for a long tenure, right? And does Kenny feel like that guy when you see how he cycled through in Atlanta, cycled through in Brooklyn, and found himself on coaching staffs? And he's well regarded, by the way. Steve Kerr speaks highly of him. Greg Popovich speaks very highly of him as well. So he's a very well-respected coach, not just a figurehead by any stretch of the imagination.
A very well respected, but he also has a little bit of a reputation of being crazy, a zealot, a nut. Jeff Teague told a story about him going out barefoot at the gym at 6 a.m., putting up shots. There's stories about him staying up all night, watching film. He looks... I was looking up to see his actual basketball playing career. He stopped playing basketball in 2004 internationally. I'm like, that can't be possible. He looks 70 years old. Like, I mean, it's no offense. He just looks like he's worked really hard, and he's actually like 50 something years old. But any good stories about his time with the Nets where he was a little bit nutty?
The running joke with him was always the hair gel. This is a guy that when the tip-off went up, it looked like he had been sweating profusely on the sidelines. It was just gel, and it did seem to increase from day one when he was introduced as the head coach with Sarah Kustok and the big introduction. It looked like some product, a little bit of product, and then it just built gradually. And I think the big concern, if he does get hired as the Hornets coach, is, I mean, I don't know if this plays a big role, but is some of that product seeping into his eyes as he's sweating on the sideline, right? As he's battling the referees, and does it seep into his brain ultimately? I'm not sure if that means one way or the other, but I mean, a lot of the players, they did have some fun with him on the sidelines around it. He just had that stereotypical, I guess you could say, East Coast Jersey kind of vibe. But no, listen, I think the players believed that he was intense, and that was most of it. The guy brought the barefoot shooting jump shots in the gym kind of intensity to things, which makes him a bit of a character. And again, there's a lot of coaches here. I think Charlotte is an attractive job. And this is why I push the pause button on giving my full endorsement of Kenny Atkinson. I think you're going to find there's a few more coaches with better track records and reputations that say, they've proven it to a higher level than Kenny, and maybe you'd rather do without some of those antics around this particular position.
Well, I mean, and if you look at all of these coaching changes or general manager changes, so many times the hire ends up being a reaction to the fire. Yep. And so I think if that's the case, then Kenny Atkinson is the perfect reaction in that, Borrego brought a cool, calm, collected, we're going to deal with everything in-house kind of attitude. And I think Kenny would represent a little bit of a reaction to that, where there is an intensity. There's a fire that I've said all last season was missing from this team at times. So, that just like, we've got to go out there. We've got to hold each other accountable, not just say things, but do things, that kind of intensity. I'll also say Walker is an expert with the product. I keep it all natural. This is all natural, baby.
Yeah, except I hate the wet look though. Like that look that you're talking about with Kenny
dry
Atkinson.
Product. I get it.
Yeah, we use all dry. We use a little bit to make it look a little bit crazy, and we are not slicking that thing back. I mean, Kenny Atkinson, you are putting a lot on it. You're going the LA Looks dad style extreme hold, and you are dumping half a bottle on your head each. I bet it's one of those things where you open up the cabinet and there are 10 LA Looks bottles in his cabinet right now as we speak.
I got to be honest with you, as someone who has Irish and German and Italian in my background, it's a very delicate balance of walking out the door going, you're sending out some vibes depending on how much of what you put into your hair. So I obviously always keep an eye on it from that standpoint. One last thing I will say, if we're I don't want to end on a basketball related note, who wants to do that? But Kenny also was really good with minute shares. He played everybody got about 30 minutes. And he acknowledged as DAngelo Russell was developing, hey, we got to look to utilize him more. I mean, Ball's not going to fall prey to, we only gave him 31 minutes, but he'll maximize what the value of every player on the roster is. And I think sometimes when you're the back end of the playoff picture, when listen, we don't have 3 superstars, right? We need everyone to play their role. He's going to find the niche for these guys and then look to utilize them as best as possible. So I think maximizing every player that you have available, that's going to be something that Kenny brings to the table. And that can be in the margins, getting you those 3 or 4 wins that talks about playing game scenarios. So that's a plus for him. Yeah.
Fans are going to want, Doug, right? Yeah, fans are going to want whoever is the next head coach to maximize LaMelo Ball's minutes. They want him to play a lot.
Well, not even LaMelo, just some of the other players. It was my biggest problem with Borrego and Kenny Atkinson. If that's a selling point for him, then pretty enticing to me. So there we go. Talking about Kenny Atkinson with Adam Armbrecht of the Locked On Nets podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Adam Armbrecht. Adam, thanks so much, man. This was great. Really appreciate your time.